Good afternoon. My name is Dina Butler, and I am a career coach at Goodwill Industries of West Michigan's Career Center. And I'm here today to share with you some tips on how to create an effective resume. So, the first question we need to ask ourselves if you've never created a resume is, why do we need one? Why do we need a resume? Think of your resume as your billboard. It's your marketing tool that is going to allow you to show a piece of yourself to prospective employers in the hopes of getting an interview. It speaks for you, and its entire goal or purpose is to get you an interview where you can go in person and really sell yourself in the hopes of getting employment. So employers have to review a lot of resumes when they post a job. And so they appreciate a few very specific things when it comes to you creating your resume. The first thing is that you want to make sure that your resume is short and concise. I always use this little analogy. On a resume, words are actually very expensive, so use them sparingly. When you get a job interview and you're sitting in front of someone, words are wonderful, so consider them cheap and use a lot of them. But when it comes to your resume, they're expensive. So make sure that you keep your resume very short and concise. Use very clean formatting. There are a lot of different types of resume formats out there, and we'll get into those a little bit further in our webinar here. But you want to make sure that your resume is easy to look at and not full of a lot of words and fancy things that are going to distract an employer and often have them set it aside because they don't have the time to really weed through and try and find the relevant information. And the third thing is to make sure that you're actually using very specific positions that you're applying for or the type of work that you desire for employment when you're creating your resume. The most important thing that you want to do with a resume is to make an impact. You want to grab the employer's attention. I've worked with a lot of employers over the years, and most of them have told me that they spend between 10 and 15 seconds actually deciding whether or not they're going to read a resume in its entirety and potentially interview a person. 10 to 15 seconds, that's it. That's not a lot of time. So we have to work very hard to make sure that you make an impact with the information that's at the top of your resume. You want to use action words, and you always want to speak to results on the job if you can do that. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you're identifying your skills and experience. That's the information that you want to stand out the most because that speaks to what you can do and what you can offer the employer. So if you find yourself in a situation where you've had a lot of jobs, or maybe you find yourself in a situation where you've never worked in the community before, you still have a lot of skills and experience. But when you sit down to actually write a resume, it can be kind of daunting to sit there and try and come up with these things. It's almost like you get word block, right? Sitting in front of the computer. So a very helpful thing that you can do in order to help make sure that doesn't happen to you is literally grab a piece of paper, blank on both sides, and put your entire life, everything that you've done on that piece of paper. Now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Dina, that's a lot, or I don't have anything. But when you actually sit down and you think about it, you're going to be surprised what you actually write on that piece of paper. Write down any previous employment, any education that you've garnered over the years. Even if you didn't complete it, it's still experience that you gained. Write down volunteer work that you've done, hobbies that you have, sports you've played, any side work that you've done. All of this is relevant. We're going to talk in a minute about what are called skills. And all of this experience that you have may not have been learned directly on the job, but it still makes up who you are as a person, and it's going to help you communicate with the employer what you're capable of doing for them. The next thing to keep in mind is to be prepared to describe your skills and your experience with examples. So you want to make sure that any skills or experience that you write down, you actually have an example of you demonstrating that skill or that experience so that it's very, very believable and genuine to the employer. And then lastly, make sure that you don't oversell yourself in order to make your resume stand out. This can work against you very, very quickly. So it's important for us to talk about the couple of different types of resumes that there are. The two most common are called the functional resume and the chronological. And most people, if they've never created a resume before, are going to choose between one of these two. So the functional resume focuses on your skills and your strengths right at the top. It's a very good resume if you have gaps in work history, if you haven't kept jobs for a long period of time, or you have a short work history on several jobs, Or it can be good also if you have a varied work history. So if you're kind of that jack of all trades and you've done a lot of things, you can help compile all of the different skills and experiences you have relevant to the position you would be applying for with a functional resume. The second type of resume is a chronological, and it is exactly that. It's a very traditional style of resume. It's probably the type you've seen before, and it literally lists your employment history in a chronological order, starting with the most recent job to your oldest job. This is a very good resume for someone who has a long work history in the field that they've been working in, or they have several different. So take, for instance, if you've been working in the manufacturing industry for 10 or 15 years and you've done many different things in the manufacturing industry, but it's all been in the manufacturing industry, this would still be a very good resume for you to chronologically list all of those different things that you've done. So if we've learned the two different types of resumes, how do we start? So it's most common to create your resume on a computer. Most employers today like to receive your resume either on a printed document from a computer or electronically. So it would not be appropriate, obviously, to hand out a handwritten resume. So you can start by using a resume template. This would be probably the most common today way of creating a resume. You can use Microsoft Word, which you literally open up Microsoft Word, you search for a resume template in the search bar, and there are several different options that you can choose from. You can just find one that you like. The formatting is already done for you, so you don't have to worry about that, and you can start entering your information. You can do a very similar, have the same experience using Google Docs. So if you have a Gmail account and you go into Google Docs, you just open a new document, click Add On, and search for the resume templates, find one that you like, and start entering your information. You can also use different websites. If you throw into a Google search bar resume template, you will come up with a lot of different answers as far as different resume templates that you can use. These are fine as well, although I would encourage you to make sure that you search for free resume template. One of the things a situation you can find yourself in is you find a resume template website, you enter all of your information, things are going well, you feel like you're putting together a very good resume, you get to the end and you want to click create document, and they want to charge you in order to compile all of your information into a resume format. So that is not where you want to find yourself, because there are plenty of free options out there. So if you're going to use a resume template, search for a free resume template. Another option that you can use is an online job service. There are several of them out there right now. I listed Indeed's, Hot Jobs. There are some very common ones. And what you do is you actually register as a job seeker with those individual sites, and it allows you to create a resume within that site to use to apply for their jobs. You literally complete the resume by filling in the fields, and then that resume will be available to you to apply for jobs that are listed on that service. So let's talk initially about the anatomy of a resume. So there are some important key areas that might sound very basic, but there are some tips with some of the general information that you want to pay attention to that can make your resume a definite plus or create a situation where it's a negative. So the first one is the most important information on your resume, honestly, is your general information. And that's going to be how are employers going to get a hold of you? This sounds very basic, but there are some areas where you could trip up in your general information. So when you put your name in, you want to make sure that it stands out. Most of your pre-formatted resumes are going to do that for you. But if you're creating one on your own, then make sure that you bold it, change the font, increase the size of the name, something to make your name stand out, because after all, that's what we want them to remember is you. Your address is pretty basic. Put your address down, right? The only thing that I would mention in this area is if you're going to be looking for employment somewhere outside of the driving range of where you live, somewhere in your resume, put that you're willing to relocate. So I live in West Michigan. If I'm looking for a job in Portland, Oregon, I want to make sure that I'm going to put somewhere in my resume that I'm willing to relocate, because I want the employer to know that. Otherwise, they may overlook my resume and say, Dina from West Michigan, it really is not going to commute, if you will, to Portland, Oregon. So just put somewhere on there that you're willing to relocate. Otherwise, if you're looking in a drivable distance of your home, simply put your address. Your phone number. Make sure that you are listing a phone number that works on a regular basis. This can be a challenge sometimes, especially if you're looking for a job. It can be difficult to make sure that your phone is always working. It gets expensive. So list your phone number. Make sure that you have a professional voicemail that just simply states your name and the fact that you will get back to the individual as soon as possible. If for some reason you don't have a working phone number, or you are not confident that you are going to be able to have your phone working all the time, then find someone who can be a message phone for you. Make sure that that individual's phone obviously is going to be working on a regular basis, and that they know that you are using them as a message phone. Make sure they have a professional voicemail and that they would get the messages to you in a very timely way so that you don't miss an opportunity. And the last area of general information would be your email. Email is very important. If you use email and check it on a regular basis, that's the key, then include it on your resume, because a lot of employers will make an initial contact using email. It's simple for them. It's very efficient. But make sure that your email is professional. It really should only be a combination of your name and a number, or whatever numbers you need to do to make it unique when you're creating an email address. So you want to make sure you're not using nicknames or things of personal expression in your email that can give away information about you that might be a concern to an employer. And the only other thing I'd mention on email is make sure you're only listing your email address if you check it on a regular basis. If you don't, and an employer contacts you, you may miss an opportunity because you don't check it on a regular basis. The next area of a resume underneath your general information would be your objective statement. The objective statement is actually very simple, but it can trip people up very easily. So an objective statement is a simple statement that's expressing your intent. What do you intend to do? So you're intending to get a job, right? That is your intent. And so I've given a couple of examples of an example of an effective objective statement and a not so effective objective statement. So the most important thing when it comes to your resume is you always want to make sure that you're communicating what you can offer the employer. We have to think of it in a way that it is about them. What can I do for them that is going to make them want to hire me? How can I be an asset to them? So the first example says, a dedicated and hardworking team player who consistently meets deadlines while producing quality work seeks a position in manufacturing material handling. So in this example, the individual is a material handler. They know how to operate a forklift. They're communicating to the employer that they're dedicated and hardworking. I don't know an employer out there that's not going to want that. They're a team player. They consistently meet deadline and they produce quality work. This simple statement gave the employer 4 or 5 different ways that you could be that this individual could be an asset to an employer. So if we look at the second example, this could raise red flags for the employer. It simply says, an ambitious self-starter seeks a position to expand my knowledge and training as a manufacturing material handler. So where does this become less attractive? An ambitious self-starter. There are some fields where this would be an asset. Sales is one I can think of. You would have to be very ambitious to be successful in sales and be a self-starter, because you're often have to be very self-driven in that field. In a lot of different positions, an ambitious self-starter could make an employer a bit wary, because they may think that that person is going to come in with a lot of ideas, but may not necessarily be coachable. Seeks a position to expand my knowledge and training. So you're telling the employer what you want to get out of the job instead of what you can offer the employer. You probably do legitimately want to expand your knowledge and your training, and that's okay. That's actually a good thing, and an employer would appreciate that. But when you're seeking employment, we need to be communicating to them what we can offer them. The last thing I would say about an objective statement is make sure that you're changing your objective statement for each area of work you are seeking. So we'll use the manufacturing industry again. So in this particular example, we used that the individual is a material handler in the manufacturing industry. But what if the individual has machine operation experience on a CNC machine, and that's the position they're applying for? They would want to change their objective statement to say seeks a position in manufacturing CNC machine operation. So you want to be very specific about the type of work you're seeking with your objective statement. This is often the second thing the employer is going to read. And remember, we only have 10, 15, maybe 20 seconds to grab the employer's attention. So, how do we handle the rest? How you proceed with your resume content is largely going to depend on how your skills, experience, and education relate to the employment that you're seeking. So, if your education is necessary and directly related, then you want to list that first. So, an example I gave is if you're seeking an engineering position and you have an engineering degree, and that degree is required likely for the position, you're going to want to make sure that you communicate that first, or a teacher, or a social worker, or an accountant. If an advanced degree is required for the position, you want to let the employer know right away that you have those credentials so that they will continue reading your resume. If you have strong skills in the employment area, list them first. So, for instance, in the previous example, if you're a manufacturing material handler, one of the first things you're going to want to communicate to the employer are the different types of forklifts or material handling equipment that you can operate. And if you have a long work history in the employment area, list it first. So, for instance, with that chronological resume we were talking about, if you have a long history, a long work history in the employment that you're seeking, you're going to want to make sure the employer knows that. That will grab their attention and that will hold a lot of weight with the employer. So let's talk briefly about education. This one can be kind of difficult for individuals. Maybe you started an education adventure and you were not able to finish it for various reasons. So you want to list your most recently obtained or most advanced degree first. Always list the degree or the credential earned, the name of the school, the city, state, and the graduation date. Now, if for some reason you are close to completing a degree or you're close to graduating, say from your GED or a technical school or an associate degree or a bachelor's degree, it's okay to list an anticipated graduation date. I think an employer would understand that it would be appropriate for you to be looking for employment if you're within a couple of months of graduating because you want to make a very as seamless as possible transition into the workforce. List any specific courses if they're strongly related to the desired employment that you're seeking. So, for example, if you were looking in the food service industry to work for a bakery and be a dessert artist, you would want, and you took baking and pastry classes while you were in school, you would want to make sure that you list those. So you might list that you have a culinary degree or you have culinary training through such and such college, but then you would also want to list that you have bakery and pastry classes because those would be very relevant and would catch the eye of the employer. And lastly, on education, make sure that you list any certificates that you have that would be appropriate to the employment. So for instance, with the food service industry, if you're certified in ServSafe, that's very important to them. If you are in the manufacturing industry and you have OSHA 10 or different safety certifications, that would be very important to the employer. So you would want to make sure that you list those. So let's talk another minute about our skills and experience. So this is where you want to grab that piece of paper that you put your life down on and put it to work. So when you're looking at this piece of paper, you want to go through with a highlighter and highlight all of the different areas or things that you've listed that could be relevant to the employment that you're seeking. Then you want to list them on your resume using action statements. So the difference between using an action statement and not using an action statement, I have a couple of examples below. So if you list that you're a problem solver, that would be a good thing to an employer, right? They want someone who's going to think and solve problems. So if you just list problem solver, does it really communicate to the employer what you're capable of? But if you simply list it as skilled in diagnosing and troubleshooting, that tells the employer a little bit more about what you're capable of. It still keeps it short and concise, but it uses action words to communicate what you're able to do. Another example is listing that you're a machine operator. Well, there are a lot of machines out there when it comes to the manufacturing industry, for instance. So you would want to make sure that you can get a little more specific while keeping it short and concise. So the example was either list you're a machine operator or demonstrated experience in operating CNC machines. That tells the employer a little bit more about what you're able to do for them. And then the last thing you want to make sure you do when you're listing your skills and experience is make sure that you're not being too redundant. There are a lot of skills or things that you can do that are very closely related to each other. So you can group those together sometimes to keep it short and concise so that your list isn't too long. The next area on your resume would be your work history. So remember, on the chronological resume, the one where we list everything from most recent job to oldest, that may be the first thing that's on your resume if you're doing chronological. But if you're doing a functional resume, your work history is going to be a little bit farther down, and your skills and experience are going to be toward the top. So when it comes to your work history, you always want to list your most recent experience first and then continue backward. List the name of the employer, the city and state that you worked in, the position you held, and the dates that you were employed. And then underneath that, list the primary responsibilities in that position while continuing to use action statements. But remember, words are expensive, so be effective with them, but concise. So make sure that you're communicating what you can do, but you're not telling a paragraph story about your primary responsibilities in your job. Another area on your resume would be accomplishments and other information. So some resume formats have this in there for you, and this is where you could list any accomplishments that you feel would make you stand out. So for example, if you were on the dean's list when you were in school or honor roll, if you are a member of a professional organization, that would be appropriate to put on your resume. Most importantly, one that might be relevant to the job, or any exemplary service awards. Anything that would make you stand out to the employer would be okay to list here. But have no fear. If you don't have anything to put here, and a lot of people don't, you can just delete it from your resume. Any of the formats that you would be using, the pre-formatted resumes, you can highlight it and delete it, and you don't have to worry about having a blank spot on your resume that would seem like you are lacking. The last thing that you would typically find on a resume is related to references. So it is important to make sure that you have at least 3 references that you can list should an employer ask for them. So it's appropriate on a resume to simply list, under the title references, available upon request. You're going to be handing this resume out and delivering it electronically to many different employers in your employment search. And when you're using a reference, you're giving away the contact information for that individual. So you don't want to give that to just everybody. Most employers would ask for references in an interview setting. And so if they're going to ask for references, you're being considered for the position. So it would be appropriate then to give them the references and contact information that you have. So on your resume, simply list available upon request. Then make sure that you have 3 good, solid references that you can use should an employer ask for them. I have a couple of important things to remember when it comes to references. The first one is make sure they are non-family members. Most employers, when they ask for references on an application, specify that they want non-family members. But even if they don't, you typically do not want to give a family member as a reference. Usually most employers will disregard that reference because they figure your family members may not be completely open and honest should they have issues or concerns. It's not a reliable reference. Try to use people that are related to your employment or your education history. So we've listed a couple people here: a previous supervisor, a previous instructor in an education setting, a previous coworker, a previous coach is an excellent individual to use. So just kind of think, rack your brain a little bit and write down those individuals. And then this is the most important part: connect with them and get permission to use them as a reference. The last thing you would want is to have an employer call a previous coach or a previous supervisor and say, hey, Dina listed you as a reference, and they're caught off guard. That would not look very good, even though they may have wonderful things to say about you. It just creates an awkward situation. In summary, once you have completed your resume, it's very, very helpful to ask one or a few individuals that you trust for feedback on the resume. Hand it to them and say, if I'm applying for this position, would this resume grab your attention, and would you want to at least meet me? Because that is the purpose of your resume. Secondly, once you've completed your first resume, you're going to want to create multiple resumes. Now, before you roll your eyes and say, oh, gracious, I don't think so, it's very simple. Once you've created your first resume, you use that as your template to create additional resumes. So for instance, if you have a lot of experience in the food service industry and the manufacturing industry, and you're looking for jobs in both areas, you don't want to create one resume that has all of that experience. You want to create a resume specific to the manufacturing industry and a resume specific to the food service industry. That will clearly communicate to the employer where your interest lies. Lastly, Goodwill Industries of West Michigan has a fully functioning career center with career coaches that are available to help you. So, as you embark on your adventure to write your resume, if you find yourself completely stuck or not sure how to move forward, contact a career coach at Goodwill's Career Center. The number is on here, set 231-722-7871 to schedule an appointment. And we are very good at helping you work through the roadblocks that you might experience in creating your own resume. I hope this information was helpful for you. And if you need assistance, just give us a call.